I've decided to go to university. Now then, if Miss Hooper, my very first teacher in primary school, heard that news, she might be quite shocked that I'm saying this at the ripe old age of 47. On more than one occasion over the past few decades, I have affectionately cursed Miss Hooper for setting such high expectations for me. Within days of me starting school, she informed my parents that I was potential Oxbridge material. A child with my natural academic ability was clearly cut out for one of the top universities in the land. But it didn't happen. It didn't even get close. So what went wrong? Well, for a long time I assumed that I went wrong. My teachers assumed I went wrong. My parents assumed I went wrong. But I didn't go wrong. The education system simply did not respond to my needs. And this was because of my undiagnosed autism. Mind you, I can't think of a single child at school who was diagnosed with autism. This was the 1970s when I started school, and no one had yet described the spectrum of autism, nor the triad of impairments, and we were still years away from Asperger syndrome being used as a diagnosis. Right, let's get back to my school days. So it's New Year of 1978. I'd been to play school for a year or so, and I was quite looking forward to joining the big school. I was already able to read and to write, and I already had a bit of a reputation, as I was not backward in informing my play school leaders when they misspelt my surname. And I was most offended, and I told them, when their response was that a 3-year-old shouldn't be able to spell their surname anyway. And you can probably guess from that how well I was going to fit in with the education system. So here I was about to go to school. Miss Hooper, who was my class teacher, seemed very old to me. I suppose she was almost at retirement age back then. In fact, she died earlier this year at the grand old age of 100. She could be described as an old-fashioned sort of teacher, strict, slightly distant, very academic and serious, not at all like the play school leaders who would happily get involved hands-on with the children and cuddle them and play with them and fuss over them and all of those sorts of things. It was bloody brilliant, actually. I was relieved. Miss Hooper gave me extra reading lessons and I was allowed to choose books from the junior children's library, even though I'd only just started in the infants. I was even allowed to stay in at lunchtime and do more reading instead of joining the other children outside to play. I very much fitted in with this school system and I was happy to be spending my time there stretching my brain. I'd like to point out at this point that autism is a spectrum. That doesn't mean some people are mildly autistic and some are severely autistic, and it doesn't have anything to do with academic ability either. Autism is a spectrum because whilst all autistic people share similar ways of processing the world, this manifests in different ways. I was academically bright, yet took a very long time to learn how to tie my shoelaces. I could talk with ease about one of my interests, maths or animals for instance, but I struggled to know what to say to make friends. For me, it's these contradictions that are the very essence of my autism. The huge expectation from others and myself that because I can do this thing very well, I should be able to do most other things very well too. And I remember a phrase that was used repeatedly about me as a child. How can someone who is so clever be so stupid? This very negative phrase has taken a lot of shifting from my internal dialogue, probably because I felt it summed me up so perfectly. Now, I got hold of some old pictures from my first year of school and some of my classwork too, and I can remember the sheer joy of finishing my work and asking for some extra sums to keep me busy while I waited for the rest of the class to catch up. And I remember exactly how I used to think and feel aged 4 when I drew these pictures. I was exactly the same then as I am now. But it's nice to look back and remember that I was actually quite a sweet, fairly ordinary little girl too. So let's have a look at these. There we go. A nice child's picture of some donkeys on the beach. I grew up at the seaside and I loved animals, so it was an absolute joy to go and see the donkeys. And then here we are, proof that I could write my name in full. And look, a clock. And here's another donkey picture, and as you can see on this one, this is a tree, and funnily enough there's a clock on there too with all the numbers on. Here is a garden with a donkey and a clock with all the numbers. Are you seeing a pattern here by any chance? And here are 2 flowers, just like I've written at the bottom. But what it doesn't say is, here are two more enormous great clocks towering over everything with all the numbers written on. I'm afraid it doesn't get much more interesting than that, actually. There we go. There's a clock. This one has got 3 clocks with all the numbers written in. Another clock. Ah, good, no clocks. Donkeys. Now here's something different, a car. No clock, no donkeys, but I have written all the numbers across there. And then here are a few pages of my sums. So this was a delight of my life. There we go. Lots and lots of sums. Mind you, look at this one. This was meant for Stephen W. I would not have been very happy about this having somebody else's work. And to show what a sum fan I was, when I'd finished those, I would write my own. There we go. So I'm beginning to see how I was starting to look like to the other children. I mean, a 4-year-old who wanted extra maths for fun. Yep, my differences were beginning to show. But no one suspected that this socially awkward, pedantic child with a massive obsession about numbers and animals was autistic. I was lucky in a way because my academic brightness and extremely polite good behaviour masked some of my difficulties. My quirks, as I suppose they were probably perceived, were tolerated because I was bright and I was well behaved. I was told I was clever. I knew I was clever. I was probably a total pain in the backside because my need for accuracy, order and consistency combined with my academic ability meant that I would correct people whenever I felt it was needed, and I wouldn't really take into consideration anyone else's feelings or opinions. However, I was, and I still am, a polite person and very considerate. I would happily correct someone because, goodness me, that's what I would want them to do for me. Surely they must want me to tell them what they got wrong. And I tell them with no malice, no unkindness, just total honesty, straight to the point logic and reason. You know what? They probably found me super helpful. Wouldn't they? Of course, this different way of experiencing empathy and of interacting with others was not the typical way of my peers. Let's skip on a few years now to secondary school. Secondary school was bigger. There were more people, there were separate lessons, there were different classrooms and a timetable to negotiate. Let's see what I've got here. Things started relatively okay. But over the course of my 5 years at secondary school, things deteriorated, and I'll share some genuine extracts from my school reports. Right, let me just find the right one. So, year 1. This is from the head of year. Emma has shown herself to be a pupil of the highest quality. She is enthusiastic and terribly energetic and excitable about what she's doing. She's clear thinking and responsible, and I am sure she had much to offer the school in the future. The staff reports speak for themselves. An excellent report. Yep, there it was, a bright future ahead of me. Let's see what the individual teachers have to say. Maths, well, there should be no problem there with maths. Grade A for effort and A for achievement, great. Now, what did the teacher say? Okay, here goes. Emma works extremely well in class. She is a little dogmatic in her approach to mathematics, but at least discusses with me any disagreements she has over method. Okay. Yeah, that probably sounds quite a lot like me. The rest of that first year report was also good. A's for everything apart from PE, and that wasn't a surprise. I have the coordination of a blancmange, and I can remember from primary school how my parents were told that there hadn't been a single PE lesson where I didn't injure myself in some way. Anyway, let's look at the second year at secondary school. A good performance in all subjects according to my head of year, perhaps a little too talkative. Yep, drama teacher, they say, very talkative but pleasant with it. Spanish. Emma is a lively character, perhaps a little too lively at times for her own good. French. Emma's concentration in class is apt to lapse rather too much. Okay. Science. Emma does not seem to work to her full ability. She can occasionally behave stupidly. Well, actually, Mr. Hughes, I don't think you're meant to use the word stupid when referring to your pupils. Who else have we got? history next. Disappointing, lacks depth. Emma must be wary of developing a superficial approach. Right, so I'm not quite the pupil of the highest quality from year one, and whilst I was still mostly getting A's for achievement, my grades for effort were now tending to be B's. But how I wished they knew the sheer amount of effort I had to put in, just sitting on that crowded, noisy bus while teenagers screeched and sprayed copious amounts of impulse body spray around, just so I could spend a day in a brightly lit classroom full of people who were just not like me. By the third year, I needed to be choosing my options for GCSEs, the new exam that was replacing O-levels, and I was not very happy about GCSEs. There was coursework required and homework to complete, and I like tests and exams. Coursework meant sustained efforts and the ability to demonstrate you really understood something and you could apply it across a range of contexts. And I preferred relying on my good memory and just winging it in the exam. Okay. Emma must learn to pay attention. That was from my English teacher, and this is one of my favourite quotes ever. Her ability cannot be questioned, her attitude can. And there you have it. My shift from being a bright, lively, engaged member of the class to a child who is perceived as having an attitude problem. There is room for improvement, according to my French teacher. Still got an A though. Around that time, I also remember frequently being told that I wasn't listening, and I would of course reply that I was, and I'd repeat what had been said word for word. And then, wait for it, I'd be told, well, look like you're listening then. So I developed my listening pose based on Rodin's The Thinker. It felt nice to do this, and is still a favourite soothing strategy when I need to calm myself in front of other people without drawing too much attention to it. Easily distracted, that's what Spanish teacher said. Needs to do a great deal to redeem herself, that's physics. Here's a nice one, history. Emma is a highly intelligent and articulate girl with a waspish sense of humour. Well, thank you for that. I only didn't take history as a GCSE option because I didn't like the other history teacher. He was sexist, and I told him. He told me once that girls should help their mums with cooking and cleaning during the holidays. Fussy and disorganised, that's what the art teacher said about me. So I entered the last 2 years of compulsory education and I chose my options, which were as science-based as possible. I wanted to study medicine, and unfortunately I told my parents and teachers this aged about 7, so everybody was counting on this actually happening, and that initial pressure of being Oxbridge material had stuck with me. Inside I knew I was different. I pretended to like pop stars and boys like the other girls did, but I didn't really. I pretended to like makeup, but actually found it felt extremely unpleasant to wear. I liked animals and nature and thinking about things and being on my own. And I was the most gullible, easiest to tease, bully or pick on child ever, and I repeatedly kept doing whatever it was that made people pick on me, and I had no idea what it was. No amount of masking my undiagnosed autism ever really hid it. I knew I was different, and everybody else knew I was different too. But overall, academically, I was doing okay-ish. My 4th year report refers to me having ability but not quite attaining what I'm capable of. I was told I needed to be more disciplined and determined to get things done on time, to be more consistent. My maths teacher was worried about my attitude, so was my French teacher. My physics teacher criticised my forgetfulness. My chemistry teacher said I needed to apply myself more. The careers teacher was concerned about me being nervous over using the telephone. But there were some positives too. I went to a religious school, so RE lessons were compulsory, and I opted for the GCSE called Religion and Life. It was interesting, and there were plenty of philosophical discussions to be had. And Mr. Paul, my RE teacher, is firmly stuck in my memory. I started secondary school in 1984, and he suggested we read the George Orwell book of the same name. He welcomed my questioning mind, and here's what he said about me in my report. Emma has so many ideas that the effect can be torrential. I'm considering issuing the rest of the group with umbrellas so they can survive the deluge. Actually, Emma is invaluable as a catalyst of ideas, and her learning and grasp of religious ideas is very promising. That was a nice thing to say about me. But I bet you can imagine how I was starting to feel confused, troubled and frightened. I was still mostly getting A grades for my achievements, but I didn't look like I was putting enough effort in. I was distractible and inconsistent and forgetful. Some teachers thought I was great. Others thought I had an attitude problem and found me exasperating. The background to this was, of course, my autism, my very different sensory processing system that found some noises so painful, it was even agreed by the school that I didn't have to go in the woodwork or the metalwork classrooms. But the impact of my autism was not just on my academic work. Yes, I was dogmatic, I was distractible and so on, but I was also bullied mercilessly. I found fitting in and making friends painfully difficult. I also had some pretty horrific life events to cope with that were secret and almost unbearably painful to cope with. My life outside of lessons was horrendous, and none of these teachers knew. In my 5th and final year, the teachers seemed more positive about me, probably because I did well in my mock GCSEs. My report comments are mixed, but so many of them are describing a very typically autistic girl. Listen to this positive one. Emma has an occasional tendency to gallop off into the sunset in the pursuit of an idea that attracts her, but which is not strictly relevant. But I suspect this is just the way she is, a super student and a lovely person. My confidence in my cleverness was diminishing, and my physics teacher described how I underestimated my own ability. My chemistry teacher refers to me being disorganised and not averse to stopping him mid-flow to clear up any point that has not been made clear. And I'm not sure if that was meant as a positive or a negative, but either way, it's pretty autistic. I was feeling relief, I think, that school would soon finish and I could leave. I planned to take A-levels in a college of further education, which was a much better setting for me. The teachers tended to drop that dark sarcasm in the classroom once you got to call them by their first names instead of sir or miss. So I sat my GCSEs, I did well. I went off to take science A-levels, but as a college staff reported, I did not cope well with the transition. I tried A-levels a second time, but no, education just wasn't working for me. If you've read my blog about how I learn and the difficulties this causes my teachers, then you'll understand more about how that combination of sensory, social and teaching factors just don't work for me at all. So we skip forward 30 years and I'm off to do my PhD. I will be a doctor, but not the medical surgeon I plan to be. My PhD is about neurodiversity and employment. And this is because I have been successful in my career. Being a catalyst of ideas is useful. Being nervous of using the telephone is still problematic, but where my skills are valued, colleagues are often, but not always, happy to make accommodations. My differences can be an asset. I have an appreciation of the world being a far more complex place than I did as a child. I still call people out when I need to. I'd still tell that history teacher he was being sexist. But I'd be more diplomatic with my maths teacher, and I certainly wouldn't tell him he was wrong just because his way of working out a maths problem was different to mine. I got hold of these old reports when I went to see my family earlier in September, and I didn't even know they were still in existence. And I wondered if my autism would be apparent when I read them. Judge for yourself. I struggled my way through school without knowing why. Surely a bright, talkative girl would be successful, but she wasn't. Well, not in the way school expected anyway. Usually in life, we're most successful when we play to our strengths, and other people play to our strengths too. I'd like teachers to think about the bigger picture when they're writing or thinking about pupils' stupid behaviour or their attitude problems. Neurodiversity could be behind it, especially when you view the bigger picture and see the pupil's strengths as well as the issues. And these characteristics often create a whole picture of someone who experiences the world differently. And that can bring innovation as well as challenges. Teachers also don't always know what goes on outside of the classroom and the impact of these things on the child too. School-age Emma was academically bright, she was full of ideas, she was disorganised, forgetful, distracted. She had a tendency to go off on a tangent, to question things and to say what she thought. She was, and still is, nervous about using the telephone, still accident prone, still can't be in the room with certain noises, smells or lighting, and at times still socially awkward. Unfortunately, school put me off learning. It put me off making friends. It put me off myself, if truth be known. Our son is home educated. He had a fantastic primary school experience, but once we saw that some of the secondary school teachers still used that same old sarcasm, still viewed difficulties with writing, copying from the blackboard or having the correct equipment at the correct time as behaviour issues, we decided to educate him ourselves, and we're all thriving because of it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this film. I started blogging a few months ago and I've never made a vlog before, so fingers crossed you'll enjoy it. And I've added the text from this to a standard written blog with some photos too. Thank you for watching.